Alrighty, so today we're going to do the season preview of the Chicago Fire, and there's no doubt that the Chicago Fire has been one, if not the busiest team this season in terms of the offseason, and this is not a big surprise. This offseason kind of feels a little bit similar to what we saw a couple of years ago when, the Fire has a new ownership. They decided to get Raphael Wicki as their new head coach, and he definitely made a lot of roster turnover throughout the offseason, and as we know what happened in terms of that season. Yeah, it turns out most of the signings didn't really quite work out, and once again they miss out on the playoffs. And it feels like they're doing it again this time with a more experienced head coach in Gregg Berhalter, and that pretty sure every Fire fans, including myself and pretty much the neutral of MLS, are hoping that this maybe finally is the year that it worked out for them and that they can finally made it to the playoffs for the first time since 2017. But that being said, last season was an absolute disaster. They finished 7, 9, and 18. I mean, I say last season is an absolute disaster. I mean, that's a phrase that I'm pretty sure Fire fans has been used to hearing for this past decade. Finished with 30 points, and last season was kind of a season once again followed the narrative of the Chicago Fire, a team that gets off to a slow start, but then get themselves heated up as the season goes along. No pun intended, that is. And then when the calendar hits September, that's when the usual collapse happened. With this team missing out on the playoffs and actually finished dead last in the Eastern Conference and did not make it to the playoffs. As I mentioned, the last playoff appearance, it's been a while. 2017 is the last time they made it to the playoffs. They have the longest active playoff drought out of any team in MLS. Then they also have the longest active playoff series win drought out of any team as well. The last playoff series win that they had was all the way back in 2009. It's hard to believe it's been 16 years since this team has made it to the playoffs and won a playoff game. And mind you, in the early days of the Chicago Fire, when they came into the league and win the MLS Cup straight off the bat in their expansion season, and then had some successful years as well, nobody would have imagined that literally 10 years later, after the dominance that they have in the 2000s, this team would be considered not only being a bottom feeder in the league, but a team that is just single-handedly been cursed when it comes to every single season. It feels like every single season is a groundhog all kind of season for this Fire team. Somehow, in some way, they'll find ways to miss out on the playoffs and follow their usual cycle of doom. But like I said, they're hoping that Gregg Berhalter might be the one to finally end that cycle of doom. He, of course, took over in the head coaching role. And while there has definitely been a lot of criticism, especially with the way that Fire fans are a little bit concerned with the way how Gregg Berhalter, U.S. men's national team looks, and they worry that it's going to be some boring brand of soccer as we've seen his team has done. When we saw how he coached with Columbus a while back, he was actually pretty successful and actually played some really fun soccer. Now, one thing I will also say that Fire fans have said is, well, that was all the way back in the mid 2010s. That is, a lot has changed since then, and it's been a while since Greg Berhalter has been coaching in MLS, and as I said, a lot has changed ever since. So that there are definitely that point valid point of the fact that, well, since a lot of things have changed ever since, can Greg Berhalter adapt and once again look decent, and most importantly guide this team to the playoffs for the first time in what seems like forever, at the end of the season. And then of course the sporting director is also Greg Berhalter. He pretty much has unlimited power when it comes to him taking charge of this team. Very similar to what we see Bruce Arena did with the San Jose Earthquakes this offseason as well. Now, looking at the transfer that they made, yeah, there's a long list of it. When there's a wall of text, you know that the Fire has been very active in terms of the transfer window. So, for one of the first signing they, of course, they got a couple of guys from the MLS Next Pro in David Pogba and also Mari Glasgow, from what I heard. Those guys seems like very good. And then one of the bigger signing that they made earlier in the offseason is getting Jack Elliott from the Philadelphia Union. And that is definitely a big get considering. I talk about the Union, a team that seems like they're going for a bit of a transitional period. It might be a time where they start to get rid of some of their core pieces. And there's that question, is Jack Elliott is part of the future of this Union team in terms of this transitional period? Well, apparently the answer is no, because he got shipped off at the end of the season, and now he's going to the Chicago Fire, and it will be very strange seeing him in a Fire jersey. I'm so used to him wearing a Union jersey. He's been a Union player ever since he came into this league. And there's no doubt that between him and Glesnes, those two guys just completely fall off a cliff when it comes to to how they play. And the Fire are hoping that he can rediscover that good form. Maybe a change of scenery will do so. But there's no doubt that that was one of the big headline signing that the Fire made early in the season, and especially after they decided to let go of Rafael Shihos. They knew that they had to make a big signing in terms of that center back position, and Jack Elliott is definitely one of them. And then they also got Dylan Borso as a homegrown, followed by Dean Bolts that they got in the super draft. Now, in terms of some of the transfer that they have done that is not within and mostly overseas. Well, they signed this guy called Philip Zenkonago. He of course is transfer from Club Bruges, though mostly he's playing with with a team called Bodo in the Norwegian League. So we'll see how he's going to do. Something tells me, from what I heard, he's going to be a starter in the wing position, especially on the right side. And they also got Sam Rogers, who of course transferred from Lindstrom BK, followed by Leonardo Barroso, transfer from Sporting Clube de Portugal. Something tells me he could also be a regular starter as I did look at a fan made depth chart that the Fire fans have posted, and certainly their news article on their individual website talk about what how the roster it is, and I did see a lot on the predicted start 11 that Barroso is one of the starter on that fullback position, especially on that right back position as well. The fullback position is definitely going to be a strength for this team, even though I didn't actually list it there between because from what I heard, he seems very good, and with him combined with Andrew Gutman, one of the most underrated fullbacks in the league. This team definitely has some good depth, and also, well, not just good depth, but good quality when it comes to their fullback position. They also have some good depth as well in the fullback position. And then recently, this is kind of the biggest signing that they made this offseason, getting Jonathan Bamba from Celta Vigo. As I mentioned before, he was a guy that was a big part of Leo run to that league title. He still looked decent during his time with Celta Vigo and in La Liga, and there's no doubt that he's going to be a guy that they really hope that will work out. One of the things that I also will say about the Fire when it comes to one of the biggest narrative they have, besides them not making the playoffs, they have whiffed on a lot of DP signing. I mean, this team, if you're gonna join as a designated player on this team, it's almost like a great graveyard for most point. They rarely hit on DP signing, and this is where again they're really hoping that this will finally change. I mean, in some way they kind of did do a bit of a hit with Hugo Kuipers. He actually looked really decent last season as well. I mean, it took a while for him to get going, but when he got going, he finally played in that DP level. Although you also have arguably the worst DP of all time in Jordan Shaqiri out there, and getting rid of his contract, that was huge too, because it opened up a couple of DP spot, and they've already spent one of them in Jonathan Bamba. I'm assuming they're probably going to bring in another designated player, whether it's in the 10th position or even in that central midfielder position for this team. Now, looking at players that no longer on this team, there's a lot of players. Alan Aragoni, his loan got expired, followed by Javier Casi, his option got declined. Rafael Shihos, of course, they decided not to sign him. Same with Fabian Herbert, Ariel Lassiter, and Spencer Ritchie and Wyatt Omsford. All of these guys are basically out of contract, and some of them already signed with different MLS team. Then they also declined the option of Victor Brazzara, followed by Misil Rodriguez, who they also declined his option. Then they also loaned a couple of players. Well, they actually loaned one player in Giorgio Koutsias to FC Lugano. Not surprising because that partnership between them and FC Lugano is definitely there, with the owner of the Fire pretty much also owns FC Lugano, and we've seen this before, where both teams seems like they decided to transfer within, and Kutsi is one of the latest one that is going to go to pretty much the Chicago Fire parent club, and see how he's going to do. And then the other big departure, Gaston Jimenez. This was definitely a huge one because again, talk about bad DPs that is out there. Gaston Jimenez was definitely one of them, and he was kind of part of the old regime when it comes to making new signings, where he just really never lived up to his potential, and there was a talk of whether or not if they are indeed going to exercise the buyout on him, and they did. So they exercised the buyout of him. That opens a DP spot, and they also get rid of Tobias Selquist, that just really never got going with this team. He now transfer to Nojit Shidland in the Danish league. Now, looking at the first 5 games of the season for the Chicago Fire. So they start the season by playing against the Columbus Crew on the road. So yeah, that is definitely not an easy game. Although that is the Gregg Berhalter derby. It's kind of interesting that it feels like the schedule maker they did that on purpose because Gregg Berhalter first game returning to MLS. It has to be against the team that really kind of made himself a name and was kind of the reason why he got the national team job with the Columbus Crew. Then they return home for their season opener against DC United before playing on the road against Dallas, playing on the road against Toronto, and then playing on the road against the Vancouver Whitecaps. So a lot of road games to begin the season for this team, which again not a big surprise consider it's hard to play home games still in the middle of winter. Well, I wouldn't say in the middle of winter, but more like tail end of winter in Chicago. That is, but there's no doubt that it'll be very interesting to see how the first 5 game is. I will not be surprised if they struggle once again coming out of the gate. Again, one of the things when it comes to make a lot of the signings is that you hope that they can then integrate straight away, and I'll of course talk more about that. But again, this team just feels like very similar to what we saw under Raphael Wiki. Make a lot of changes throughout the season. When you make a lot of changes like that, more times or not, your squad is not going to instantly improve. It's going to take over time, and again, it'll be interesting to see how they start the season. And it'll also be interesting whether or not if they're finally going to defeat that narrative of not simply collapse in the last 5 game of the season, because the last 5 game of the season they got NYCFC at home before going on the road to play against Minnesota. Then they play Columbus at home, play Toronto at home before finishing the final game of the season on decision day by going to the New England Revolution. And there are definitely some tough teams that they have to face, but certainly with the way that they're playing at home 3 out of the last 5 games, and really the only tough game that I would say maybe Columbus that could be a tough game. Minnesota could be tough too, though Minnesota hasn't really been the team that's done well at home. And I would say NYCFC could also be a tough one because they have not had a good history in terms of playing NYCFC both at home on the road. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating whether or not if Greg Berhalter can finally change the culture of this team, simply collapse right around this side of the period and miss out on the playoffs. So looking at the strength of this team, I'm gonna say it's the attack and the goalkeeping. The attack is definitely starting to shape up very well. Obviously, I will say that if they can get that number 10, and unless I'm thinking maybe this is Brian Gutierrez team in terms of him being the playmaker, and that's not a bad option as well. I mean, throughout last season we saw that Wingard and Shaqiri wasn't actually being a liability in that position and being a black hole to that team. When Brian Gutierrez started in that role, they actually look really decent on the attacking end. So maybe they'll implement him there, and alongside with Bamba and also Kuipers, that could be a scary front three, a very underrated front three if everything goes well. Goalkeeping obviously is a big strength as well. Chris Brady continue to be a decent goalkeeper and a guy that is pretty much following the same path as Gaga Slonina, that I would not be surprised he might be sold off in the future, sure, relatively quick. Weakness, it's got to be the midfield and central defense. So as much as they have made these signings in the transfer window, I do still have question when it comes to the midfield and especially on the central defensive part. And again, going back to Jack Elliott, can he be like the guy that he was but before with the Union prior to last season? If he can get himself back in form, then we'll see whether or not if he can form a good partnership with Carlos Tiran that was not really good last season. And then of course in the midfield area, there's question in terms to that spot as well. What in the world has happened to Kellen Acosta? I mean, last season, Kellen Acosta, this is a guy that was on the verge of potentially being with the national team and maybe make his move to Europe. But ever since he came to Chicago, he just looked like a shell of his old self. I'm really hoping that he can, of course, get himself going. And then when you look at all the other midfield pieces, I think they'll definitely need to still add more in terms of that spot. So yeah, there's no doubt there's still a big weakness in terms of that spot and something that I think Greg Berhalter will continue to address. And this is also where again I would not be surprised that as much as people talk about they might sign a DP10, they might actually look into a DP8 or a DP6 instead to strengthen that midfield heading into this season as well. So the three big question, obviously, for this team, who and if they will use their last DP or U20 initiative signing. So I believe they have one more U22 initiative signing, and they also have one more DP spot to play. So we'll see whether or not if they will use it in this off season, or they'll save this until the summer transfer window. How quickly can these signing get some chemistry and integrate it into this roster? So again, when you made so much changes this off season, and especially with a new head coach being there, it's gonna take a while for it to work out. And as I said, when Raphael Wiki took over this team, was kind of similar to how what we see with this team, just kind of getting up to nuke and restart from the beginning. It just feels like this team is kind of like secretly an expansion team heading into this year as well. So we'll see how well they do. And there's definitely that pressure that they have to integrate Craig, because I'm pretty sure Fire fans are not going to be accepting the fact that this team once again miss out on the playoffs, and all these players that they sign just kind of blow up in their faces, because that's been the narrative and the curse that this Fire team has had to go through for the past couple of years. And then, of course, the last big question. I know this is a cliche question, and I know everybody has asked this question throughout the year. But really, is this finally the year? Is this finally the year that the narrative ends? And is this finally the year that the longest active playoff drought in MLS is going to come to an end? And as I even mentioned before, is this finally the year where I can actually talk about the Chicago Fire being in the playoffs? Because again, ever since this channel started covering MLS in 2018, I think this is the last team that I know of that have not made it to the playoffs. That's how long it's been since this team has not made it to the playoffs. Is this finally the year that they end the narrative? And then, of course, the expectation. I mean, I don't even need to say it. It's obviously playoff. It's a big done and a half that this team. It really doesn't matter if they make it into the play-in round, or it be one of the surprise package like Charlotte was last season. Just simply making the playoffs, it's just not only a successful season, but it feels like it's a huge relief for this Fire fan base, that if there's any fan base that deserve to make it to the playoffs, and if there's any fan base that deserve to have at least some sort of mercy being shown to their team, it's got to be the Chicago Fire. I mean, this team has been doormat for so long that I've always say, being a Fire fan, at times it can be a social experiment as well, and I do really feel bad for them, and that's coming from as a fan of another bad team, that is the San Jose Earthquakes. That I'm really wishing that this might be finally the year that this team end this narrative, and finally, for the first time in what seems like it's been a long time, the Chicago Fire might have a chance to make it to the playoffs this season. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for the Chicago Fire. And again, I know I boast a lot of hope and some optimism with this team, which I know a lot of Fire fans will say, yeah, maybe cool down your optimism, because we've seen this story before. But if you're a Fire fan, what do you think is the strength, the weakness, the free bit question, and obviously the expectation? Though I don't really need to mention too much, because I'm pretty sure every Fire fan said that the expectation is just make the playoffs and finally end this long playoff drought that they had. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.